So we've kicked off the new year thinking about setting different goals. And it can be really tempting in January to think about all the things that we want to do in 2025. We can think about all the things on our to-do list that we want to tick off, all the targets that we want to meet, maybe at school or at work or in the gym. But as a church, we want to say, what happened? What will happen if we flipped all of that? What if our goals looked different this year? And instead, we spent time considering how we might live and how we might spend time stopping and gazing on the God that is love. And so last week, we looked at the idea of stopping, taking time to pause and to give our attention to Jesus. And this morning, I'd love to talk just for a few minutes about trying less and partying more. It might be the complete opposite of what you'd expect us to talk about in church. So I wondered, most of you, I'm sure, have been to a party or hosted a party. So why not turn to the person next to you? What's the best party that you've ever been to? What's the best party that you've ever been to? So hopefully you've had a chance to at least hear one story of a great party that you've ever been to. I think the best party that I ever went to was when I was a kid, and I went to a swimming pool party where they have the obstacle course down the middle of the pool, and then afterwards they take you to a room. Presumably they use it for fitness classes, but instead they fill it with sweets. So you've just spent an hour running on an obstacle course in the middle of the pool, and then you go and fill your stomach with sweets. That was the best party that I think I've ever been to. It was so much fun. And in our story, Jesus is at a party. He's at a wedding, and weddings in Jesus' day were really big social events where the whole community would gather together. They would share food and wine and drink. They would party. They would dance. They would enjoy one another's company for sometimes even a whole week. And as we saw in the story, during the wedding day, they ran out of wine. And so Jesus tells the servants, he says, take 6 stone water jars and fill them with water. And then this water turns into the tastiest wine. In the Old Testament, the law, which is what the Jews would have followed, was seen as like a gift from God. It was a way of making yourself right with God. And the stone water jars that were used in this story were the type of jars that were used to wash yourself at the temple. And the washing of yourself using those stone water jars was like a way of cleaning yourself, both in a really literal way, like you'd wash your hands, like this. I've got wet hands now, so I can't turn it off. I'm going to have to dry them first. So it was both a literal thing of pouring out water to clean the dirt off yourself, but it also represented something that you were doing spiritually. It was like a way of saying sorry to God. And so even though the law was seen as like a gift from God for the Jews, following the law was still something that they had to try hard to do. They had to do certain things in order to make themselves right with God. They had to try hard to follow his rules and be obedient to him. And the 6 jars that are used to fill up with water, they represented your duty, the thing that you had to do to follow God and make yourself right with him. And so around the room, there are 6 glass jars. Have a look under your seat. If there is one near you, and you are willing to come towards the front, if you can grab it. If you're not willing to come towards the front, that's fine. You can pass it to someone that is. So if you've got a glass jar, come and stand along the front here if you're willing to. Just feel free to pass it to someone that does want to come to the front if you're not so sure. Can we pass one to Nancy? Is that all right? Thank you. Do you want to come and stand at the front together? So we've got 6 glass jars, and on these jars, I've written down some things that we might think that we have to do to try hard to make ourselves right with God. And so I've got some water here, and I'm going to pour a little bit in. So we've got Bible over here. Now, we might think that we, as Christians, maybe we should read the Bible, but I don't know about you, but even this week, I've thought, you know what, I've got to try really hard. I'm behind on my Bible reading plan. I've only got 4 minutes. I will just skim read this chapter and tick it off on my Bible app so that it's done. Sometimes we can approach it like that. Giving, sometimes at the end of the service, we invite people to give money. And I have sat in services and I thought, oh no, I feel really guilty. I've not given anything. Let me see if I've got a coin in my purse. And we might try hard because we feel guilty. Prayer, don't know about you, but sometimes I find that a little bit difficult. And sometimes in my house with my children, I make them pray, thank you, sorry, please. And it doesn't actually really become about the praying. It becomes about the thing that I'm making them do because I think that we ought to do that. And so sometimes I pour myself in to doing a routine because I think that's what we have to do. Your one says kind. Do you know what? Sometimes I'm not very kind and I forget all about being kind. This one says invite, and sometimes I think, oh gosh, they've talked about Alpha and they've talked about Alpha Youth, and I really ought to tell somebody that they should come along. And so sometimes I think, do you know what, on the day I'll send a text to my friend, and if I send it on the day, they've got a really easy excuse to say no, but at least I've done it, I've ticked it off, I've done what they've told me to do in church, and I've invited someone. And this one says talk. And sometimes we're encouraged, and we do encourage you to share using words about your faith with the places that you find yourself during the week. But sometimes I totally forget to do it. And sometimes I don't do it very well because sometimes the words that I use don't represent Jesus very well. But I can end up feeling a little bit guilty about it. But the problem is that sometimes we pour ourselves in to trying hard. We think because we're Christians that maybe we can make ourselves right with God. Maybe we can work harder to be right with him. Now, you'll notice at the front there's some machines here. Could you pour out what you've got in your jar into these machines? Thank you. And so, reading the Bible and praying and giving and sharing our faith, just put the glass jars along the front when they're empty. That would be really helpful. Thank you. And inviting people to come along to Alpha or Alpha Youth or inviting them to a family breakfast, they're all really, really good things. But it can be really tempting to think that we need to try and fill each cup with our own efforts and our own hard work. And we begin to notice that the more that we try hard, we notice the harder that we ought to keep trying because we can never try hard enough. And in the story, Jesus took 6 stone water jars and they were filled to the brim with water, and something transformational happened. So what if, as a church, we flipped our idea about trying hard and we thought instead about trying less and partying more? In the story, Jesus took something that represented a way of being right. They're aimed directly at Vicky there. I'm just going to turn it slightly. Not that Vicky doesn't like bubbles, but I'm sure she doesn't want them right in her face. But Jesus took in the story something that represented a way of being made right with God, about our hard work and our duty. And he took it and he did something that brought freedom and life. Because with Jesus, it's freedom that's on offer with him, grace that's on offer. You see, when the wine was poured out of those glass jars, or those stone jars in the story, it represented something that Jesus was going to do on the cross. So rather than regular washing that they would have to do to be made right with God, Jesus' death was going to make us right with God once and for all. Rather than trying hard to please God, the wine coming out of those stone jars represented that we are free to be in relationship with God and know his forgiveness. Rather than something that just brought life, Jesus came to bring life and life in all its fullness. Rather than trying more, we get to live in the freedom of his love and party more in his forgiveness and his grace. And so what if we celebrated and partied more because Jesus has made a way for us to be made right with God, and we get to live in response to that? The more that we choose to live in response to God's love and accept the freedom that he offers us, the more that we might want to spend time worshiping, the more that we want to spend time reading about him in the Bible, the more that we might want to communicate with him in prayer, the more we recognize the freedom that Jesus brings and all that he's won for us, the more that we will want to live lives that please him. Not because we have to, not because we have to try hard, but because we want to know more of that God that is love. Once you experience his love and his freedom, it actually opens you up to want to know it even more. In the Bible story, there was now a whole load of really tasty wine at the wedding. In the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus describes what he's come to do by saying this: I have come that they may have life, and life in all its fullness. So we believe that life with Jesus is the most fun life that we can live. And we long for other people to experience and know that joy and that freedom. That's why we love to host Alpha and Alpha Youth and family breakfasts, because we want to celebrate Jesus. We want to say there's someone worth celebrating. Come and join the party. And so what might it look like in 2025? Instead of trying harder and partying less, what if we made it our goal to try less and party more?